No, this is not Fred Astaire playing the Rhapsody in Blue. This is the composer himself.
Well, that's the Rhapsody in Blue. Fine, big, fat theme that always warms the cockles of my heart. I'm Paul Whiteman. You know, there's been a lot of stories how the Rhapsody in Blue happened to be written. Maybe if it comes from the horse's mouth, why, it'll have a little more weight. Many years ago, I had felt that I'd like to give a jazz concert. And I'd met George Gershwin, who was a kindred spirit, inasmuch as we'd both studied serious music before. I had been the principal viola in the Denver Symphony when I was 16 years old, and George was studying to be a concert pianist, and the source really could have been. He played fabulous piano. And we both felt that maybe once a year, even in the hallowed halls of the symphony, maybe jazz could come in and play a rather important jazz work. As I said before, I'm pretty mouthy, and I talked about this for a couple of years and didn't give the concert. And George and I talked about it many times and had decided on the title, which would be the Rhapsody in Blue, because I felt and George agreed with me, that it would be silly to write a symphony which demands certain form. Architecturally, it's pretty complicated, and it doesn't allow too much free movement. And a rhapsody, of course, means that you can rhapsodize, you can wander all around. And as I said, we talked about it a great deal. One day my manager came to me and said, "Hey, your biggest competitor has just hired the Metropolitan Opera House and is going to give a jazz concert." And I said, "Over my dead body." Pretty much body in those days, too. I think I weighed 327 pounds. Well, this I wasn't going to stay hitched for, having this idea for 2 years and having be dished by especially a pretty good competitor. So I went around looking for a hall, and I couldn't find one, and I finally was able to get Aeolian Hall, but only one day in the whole calendar, practically, and that was the afternoon of Lincoln's birthday. That would be February 12th of 1924. So I immediately hired the hall, and then I called the newspapers up and told them that I was going to give the concert, which would be the first jazz concert, which was the first jazz concert. Well, I guess I had come home from playing at the Palais Royal. It was a very famous place to dance and a very famous cafe in those days. And I'd get home around 4 o'clock, and I'd barely got to sleep at about 6 o'clock when George Gershwin called me up. I guess he'd been restless and went down to the corner and got the paper and came back and read it, and he said, "Hey, I see you're going to give your jazz concert." I said, "That's right." But he said, you expect me to do the Rhapsody in Blue? And I said, "That's right." But he said, "It's within 2 weeks." And I said, "You're right again. That's 3 times. You're in instead of out." And he said, "Well, it'd take me at least 6 months to gather this important thematic material for such a very important work." "Oh," I said, "you're talking like us symphony fellas now. You better put up your hair, because hot or cold, the body goes out in 2 weeks. And I said, "You've been thinking about it for a couple of years. You must have a lot of ideas." Well, he started to work, and each night he would bring us a page of the composition to the Palais Royal when we would finish. Freddie Grofé would orchestrate it that night. We would rehearse it the next day, and I can honestly say that when he dotted the last note, we were only one dot behind him. We were ready to play it.
Do you remember the afternoon of the Aeolian Hall concert? How did you feel?
Oh, very well. It was packed with all the greatest, a real wonderful audience. I know Fritz Kreisler was there, Rachmaninoff was there. And in the middle of the Rhapsody, I commenced to cry, and George said he did afterwards. And I can remember that I was surprised when I turned over my score that I was some 20 pages ahead of where I thought I was. It was an electrifying performance. It was a thing that was so wonderful for me, and I'm sure it was very fine for George. It gave him the courage to go ahead in the serious things. Certainly he didn't need any help in the popular. And I think it taught me one thing, that I guess critics are very important, and I'm certainly not bitter about critics either. But of the 25 great critics that were at the concert, all save Deems Taylor, who liked it, and Olin Downs, who was really a square, he wrote nothing but the symphonic reviews. Every one of the others, I should say 22, said it was nothing. Drivel, noisy, interesting, or nothing.
What would you say was Gershwin's contribution to American music?
Well, I'd have to say that we have a lot of great American composers, but I'd have to say that as far as influence on other countries and things like that, he had more to do than anybody. I wouldn't care who it is. Every symphony in the world practically will play the Rhapsody in Blue at least once a year, and I don't think they'll do that of any composition, any other composition, foreign or American.
He was a strange composer because he didn't have the great schooling and the study that usually goes with a composer of symphonic scale.
No, but you see, he had a great genius. For instance, in the early days, it was so difficult for a legitimate concert pianist to play the Rhapsody because many of those things were just purely Gershwin. They were just purely in his figure. In his fingers. Of course, he studied real hard, and after the Rhapsody, he orchestrated all his own things.
Now, the strange thing about Gershwin was that he became so popular in society. He became a celebrity himself, and you don't find this with many composers.
First of all, he was a very good-looking boy, and he was very affable.
But George loved being a celebrity, didn't he?
He didn't hate it. I'll tell you another thing. Whenever we had we'd go to anybody's house, he'd be the last one to play the piano, and might as well just be that way because he played so long nobody else could. I think he's like all of us. He didn't mind being on. His songs grow from year to year. Every arrangement seems to make them better. I'd hate to think how many thousands and thousands of times I've played the Rhapsody in Blue. Well, for instance, one time I was in the picture field for 3 solid years, and we never had a day off and played it 6 times a day, so it could give you a slight idea. But I'll say one thing, that when you hear it played with George Gershwin, I've made a lot of other recordings, too, that I'm very proud of. But I think the one with George is really the epitome of the Rhapsody in Blue. And this is how it sounds.
Rhapsody in Blue, conducted by Paul Whiteman with Gershwin at the piano. Earlier in the program, Alfred Newman told how he first met Gershwin at Remix in New York, then lived in the same neighborhood, and how their professional paths crossed in the Broadway show, The George White Scandals of 1920. Here's Alfred Newman again.